Are we live? Okay, thank you for that. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Stay compliant, keep critical talent, visa pathways for Australian employers. I'm Colin McGrath from CXC, and I'm delighted to be joined by Jamie Lingham, the CEO at Absolute Immigration, and Yang Wang, immigration lawyer at Absolute Immigration. So whether you've joined us today as an employer, a HR professional, or as a skilled worker currently in Australia, this session is for you. We'll break down the latest visa changes, sponsorship options and compliance obligations, and explore what these mean in real terms for the people and organisations navigating them. Visa rules are changing fast and skill shortages remain persistent, and understanding the right pathway to retain staff or secure your own work rights in Australia has never been more important. We'll cover the main temporary visa options, how employers can plan for longer retention and compliance, and how to stay competitive and future ready in a changing regulatory landscape. We're going to leave around 10 minutes at the end for questions, so feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go. And post the webinar, we'll provide an ebook that cover the topics that we discussed today. So Jamie and Yen, thanks for both joining. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Maybe Jamie.
Sure, I'll jump in. Colin, thanks so much for having us. We're excited. We love this. This is our sort of wheelhouse, and I know through the value offering that you guys give to your clients is this is just an extension of that. So how do we really add benefit, not on a holistic sort of level? So I'm Jamie Lingham, founder and owner of Absolute Immigration. I've been doing this for 24 years. We focus on working with companies in relation to attraction and retention strategies using overseas workers. I always say it's like, most people, in my view, a lot of providers, they'll look at things in a 1D sort of model, which is quite flat. I think we try and bring it into the 3D. So how do we give it depth? How do we give it meaning? How do we make sure that our clients have understanding of the depth and breadth of the whole visa program and can, obviously save time and money? So, yeah, I mean, as I said, we're in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. We've got a great team, and I'll introduce Yen from Absolute Immigration Legal.
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your time. So I'm Yen. I'm a senior immigration lawyer at Absolute Immigration Legal, which is part of Absolute Immigration Group. We have a team of lawyers as part of legal, and we do a whole spectrum of the visa program, migration program, especially compliance and audits. So we assist with due diligence and companies that may be going through monitoring. So we're very excited, and it's our bread and butter. So before we dive in, we just want to say that disclaimer with every presentation that today's session is for education and migration purposes only. It's not advice. Immigration law changes all the time. It's what keeps it fast-paced and exciting. So before you act, please reach out to us. One of our lawyers will be able to guide you. And with that, we can dive in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So yeah, let's kick off. So Jamie, why does my immigration strategy matter so much right now? And what's changed that's made visa planning a strategic issue for businesses?
Look, I think that one thing that changed significantly some time ago was the actual cost of the visa application. And so I don't know, you're probably old enough to remember, as am I, when applications, you go through the 457 process, and I think it was, $300 for the sponsorship and, a couple of dollars, $175, I think, for the nomination off the top of my head, and $420 for the visa. But that whole process included the whole family. And so to go through the visa process, not only was it quite a lot easier, it was also less expensive, and it was easier to move people across. And now we're looking at immigration fees, just for department fees, looking at, $10,000 plus. And so I think in my mind, one big thing that's changed in the attraction retention piece is saying, well, the government knows that there's a skill shortage. The government knows there's an aging population and declining birth rate. And so therefore they've said, okay, well, if you want to access overseas foreign nationals, you'll have to pay the premium. And so therefore companies, I think, need to be more on their game of understanding, okay, how are we approaching this? Are we getting the best value out of people being across, as in, what's the retention going to look like? Because it is a huge investment. And I think that's really, in my mind, sort of what started for the change. So to that point, going back to the skill shortages, which you touched on before, we're in a global economy that's actually all got an aging population. So we're competing with other sort of developed countries. We're competing with New Zealand, with Canada. Canada's very aggressive on their immigration program. So we want the best talent we want. But I think given today's environment, particularly with global geopolitical factors, Australia looks like a very attractive destination. You've got people coming from South Africa, maybe for safety and for opportunity. You've got people coming from the US to escape the current political situation that they probably don't agree with, and you've got people coming from the UK making their own Brexit. So there's a whole sort of global geopolitical conversation going on. But Australia is still doing quite well. I mean, we've still got resources. We're still doing infrastructure, renewables projects. So there's still a lot happening here, and there is competition for that talent. So it's about, in my mind, for companies to really understand how can they work with the immigration program, and for us being more of a consultant as opposed to a reactive transactor.
Yeah, and Jamie, we spoke about some of this over lunch, but where are you seeing the biggest shortages at the moment?
Yeah, look. I think that obviously through the healthcare space, and I mentioned to you that at the moment, I think the amount of people over 65, I think let's call it 550,000 people for the sake of the discussion. That's estimated to go to over 1.2 million people in the next 10 years. And so obviously with that aging population, everyone keep moving up, and that declining birth rate, the healthcare sector and the aged care sector is actually going to get a lot more pressure. And so to find skilled and experienced staff who can go and work with that. So being doctors, nurses, aged care, personal care assistants, etc. I think that's definitely a big one. Construction is still moving a good pace. Gold price, I think it's like $4,200 US. It's just insane. And so there's a lot of projects being invested in mining. So what we're finding is that the big miners have traditionally and continue to sort of suck up talent from smaller organisations, and so bringing people into those sort of second tier organisations, I think, is important. So there are skill shortage all around, and it's not there's for one tier one person in construction that will actually create 50 downstream jobs. So if we get a big infrastructure project put on, so it's not just those sort of top level highly skilled, who's going to make your coffee, who's going to cook your food, who's there's all those other sort of occupations. So
very good. And in your view, and just adding on to that, are employers acting early enough to get in these skills, or what are you seeing in?
It's interesting. The answer in my mind is no. And what happened a couple of years ago after sort of COVID finished, and there was the bounce back, as we like to call it. I think there was 550,000 people came in to Australia in the 12 months after COVID, which was everybody sort of looks at that and thinks we're flooding Australia with migrants. The reality was that there were 700,000 people in Australia prior to COVID on temporary visas. A lot of those people actually left. Oh, sorry, there was 2 million. 700,000 were New Zealand citizens. So a lot of those people did actually leave because they didn't get the government support. And so, I think that, the processing times at the moment, they were back then they were much shorter, but now they're looking at 5 months. And even what we see in demand industries for accredited specialists, where the departments say they get priority processing through in a matter of weeks, we have seen instances where that blows out a lot past it. So I think that companies need to have a good understanding of their workforce planning and say, okay, which countries are we bringing people from? Do they have to get skills assessments? Do they need English language testing? Do we meet the criteria? But also I'd probably look at, can we bring them on other visas? Is there working holiday maker programs, or are there like the UK pilot? There's also an Indonesia pilot, which is on hold at the moment. So, understanding what the options are, and it could also be, for short-term projects under subclass 400 visa. So I think that has to be a huge consideration. Too many times we see companies bidding for pieces of work, and then all of a sudden they'll turn around and say, okay, quick, we need those people tomorrow. And so that's not realistic. So I think companies have to also put if they're relying on overseas foreign nationals to go forward with a project, then they actually have to factor in that timing in their bid to say, okay, well, it's going to take us 6 months to get someone on the ground. So let's look at how that's going to work.
Yep, understood. And look, that leads nicely into a bit more detail around the actual visa types. So Yen, could you give us maybe a quick overview of the different types of visa types, whether it's 400, 407, 417, 403, 482, etc., and when might each apply.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So to build on to what Jamie has mentioned, using the right visas and when you are planning your pipeline is very critical because, as you know, a few months could be the recipe for losing that project. You know, if you don't have enough talent, you can mobilize. So therefore, turning your mind to what visa and when for the particular occupations in your workforce is very important, and knowing, what is the requirement. So starting with a 400 visa, you might, the couple of work visas, 400 visas, it's meant for short-term projects. So if you have the critical skills that you need to supply in a particular project with a set time frame, you could use that. So it's up to 6 months. The idea is someone very specialized that you can't find in Australia for short-term, non-ongoing project only. That's the 400.
Sorry, Yen, if
Yeah.
I can just jump in for 2
Sure.
seconds. Just to note that the 400 was very popular after COVID. And I think that some people found that it was probably a bit overused. I heard figures like, 30, 40,000 people coming across on 400 visas. And so what we've found in that space is that it really did tighten up. I think we heard about hairdressers coming across and chefs coming across. And, as you said before, the intention wasn't to facilitate a further visa application. It was to actually just do helping with surge work or with project work. But what we've found lately is certain countries, such as the Philippines or Sri Lanka or India, there's a lot more scrutiny on the 400. So just to be clear on that, because I know that some people think this 400 is a great thing, but we've seen the refusal rates, particularly for projects or for applications that don't seem to be of a project nature, are getting refused.
Interesting.
And department knows that we've also heard airport officials questioning people coming in on certain visas, like 400, or even business visitor visas when they're not meant to, and they could deny entry and cancel visas on the spot. So it's possible if you are not, if someone didn't, apply the correct visa to come into Australia. Yeah. So keeping it aware of that in mind and applying for the correct visa is very important. So thanks, Jamie, on that. There's also the training visa, which it's quite a popular question that we do get because people seem to think a training visa is everyone needs training, I suppose. I don't need to meet salary requirements, I keep them here. But there's also very important caveats. Department has recognized that, and the receive refusal rates also increase for training visas where they're not, you're utilizing them as a way to circumvent, or if your employee or candidate is not, is eligible for 482, for example. There's a couple of reasons. Sometimes the employee could have a very interesting immigration history, in which case they may not satisfy certain requirements in a training visa, particularly on that point. So, of course, case-by-case basis, you may not be eligible for training visa, so just to bear that in mind. Another the visa that's meant for work is the 482 skills in demand, which as of last year December was the temporary skills shortage visa. So there's been some changes which I think is very much welcome in terms of the work experience and the 3 streams.
It's funny, when you said the work experience, I was saying to Colin, I don't necessarily agree with all the changes. I think that, to bring someone in on a 12 months experience is difficult on a number of levels. Number one is that, you get someone who's only got 12 months experience, they have to be paid the TISMET of 76,500, and that may disenfranchise your local workers if they're on the same level. So they go, hang on, I've been here for 5 years. I know they're getting paid on this level. That's why I think the training visa is actually quite good. But back to your point, and there is, I spoke to one of the directors at the department the other day, and they said that there is a lot of scrutiny at the moment in the training visa program, because I think there's been about 40,000 applications in the last 12 months on that. So
yeah,
it's interesting. But anyway, sorry, Ian, keep going.
No, and apparently department has too much resource. It may take only 10 to 20 minutes to, review perhaps. So, there's just a lot of factors to keep in mind with preparing an application and making sure that's compliant. So with the 482, it does lead to permanent residency if the criteria is met. So that's a more long-term pathway. There's also the 403, which is very interesting. It's currently closed, the program, which may be opened sometime next year. But it is something that we would definitely factor in, advice. So if you have employees from India, the UK, and Indonesia, they may be able to assess the 403 government agreement stream visa, which is you receive an invitation from the department.
Sorry, Ken, I'll just pad that out a little bit. With the 403, the UK pilot in particular, this is sort of like there's the early careers development stream is like a working holiday maker on steroids. It's the age period is from 18 to 45 years of age, and so where the working holiday maker goes to 35. So it's quite good, and you are tied to the employer. It's a 12-month, so you don't have that 6-month restriction. So if you're looking at a candidate from the UK, you're a bit unsure about investing a lot of money, you do want to have a bit of a try before you buy, and they're older than 35 to me, and they have formal qualifications, then this is a great visa. It doesn't, however, let you bring dependents on it, right? So it's a sort of single person's visa, but also there's the innovation stream. So if you feel that you've got an innovative or a person who works in an innovative sort of stream or occupation, and you've got an innovative product that you want to bring them across for, they can actually get that visa for 3 years. And Colin and I were talking over lunch today just about, people's investment into this process. And so, you can bring them across on these types of visas, and then they can apply for permanent residency in parallel. And so you're not having to go, okay, bring them on this visa and then put them on a 482 for that big expense. So this is the point. I think every individual hire is definitely going to be different. Their own circumstances are going to be different, and it's just choosing the most appropriate pathway. But I just want to sort of bring that on the and also the Indonesian one, it doesn't have an English language requirement, and I think they're quite good programs to access, particularly if you have a business or a relationship with a business in Indonesia.
Yeah, definitely. That's an important point to note, because English, which we can go through in more detail, is often something that, in particular occupations, they may have trouble meeting. So sometimes where there may be a tailored approach towards getting the visa that they need. So the 403 is a really handy one. A working holiday visa, don't discount this whole population of working holiday visa makers. Where eligible, we always put that forward, because try before you buy. I mean, if it's someone that you're not sure whether they will stay long term, or they may view Australia as a they want to see how it goes. A working holiday, especially for British citizens, as you may all be aware, have particular perks.
Yeah, what I was going to say is it'd be good. I know we're giving slides after this. We've decided not to do slides and have it a bit more casual and free flowing, but we'll put a link on for the list of eligible countries for the 417, which is the working holiday, but also the work and holiday, which is the subclass 462. Some countries have different requirements for English or qualifications, but the other good thing with the 417, if you do have a candidate you want to bring across, and the 5 months processing time is a bit longer than you need, you obviously can move them onto the working holiday maker visa, provided they haven't used it previously. And so that processing, in my understanding at the moment, it's around about a month. I think it's actually less. I'll tell everyone a month, and if it happens in 2 weeks, obviously everyone's happy. But I just think that immediacy of getting people across, that's where these tools are really great.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sorry, to that point, and Colin and I discussed this at lunch as well, you can apply, if you've got someone here on a 417, you can apply for a 482 onshore with those people as well. So you can sort of move once they're here. And it's unlike the 400, you don't have to commit that it's an ongoing project. They can come here and we can say no problems, we're bringing them across, and then they're going to roll into a 482.
And so just what matter of interest, can you change from a 417 through to PR without going through the 482 process?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. That's something I wasn't aware of, to be honest, until
there you go.
At lunch. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, hopefully, we're giving some people some good ideas, and that's a really good point, because you can bring at the UK at the moment, you can bring people across for they can hold 3 working holiday maker visas. They can only do 6 months with one employer, but if you have multiple sites, you can move them across the or different areas, you could move them into that across that period of time. You could run it for the full 3 years, or even after 2 years. Then you could apply for what's called direct entry, which Yen will jump onto in a minute. Direct entry permanent residency through the employer nomination scheme, and they can then you'll miss out that whole 482 piece. So you'll save yourself a significant amount of money. You'll still get the tenure that goes through, but the other side to it at the moment is processing times for the 186 is taking, I think, about 18 months, isn't it?
Although for hospitality, it's been taking less. So it depends on the, I would say,
Hospitality.
occupations. And of course, aged care and healthcare as well.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but we've been seeing for some reason, maybe,
Mm.
maybe there's been regional areas particularly.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, regional, I think they get a priority. So,
yeah.
But yeah, Colin, that's definitely possible.
Mhm.
So people could bring someone across, even if you bought, say, a 29-year-old across on a working holiday maker visa from any country. They had a formal qualifications and 3 years relevant work experience. You could actually start the PR process 6 months in, and you could have the individual contribute to the cost of that. You might also want to consider saying, okay, well, we'll contribute to the cost through the migration agent fees, but if you leave us within 2 years of the visa being granted, then you pay us back. And as I said, if we make the application and the processing times being what they are, that would sort of be I suppose a surrogate 482, because they still get the same processing period. And they got a bridging visa, and when they moved on to a bridging visa when their working holiday maker expired, they actually would have to go and find a whole new sponsor, and then to go through the process to actually do that. So that's another I suppose small retention strategy. Obviously, it's not being predatory. It's just saying, okay, how do we work with the system the best we can and support individuals, but also get the benefit for the company.
Yeah, Jamie, I think the one point I get a lot with the changes is the 180-day mobility and how that changes. Because now employees free to move, where the 482 is perhaps less attractive in that sense. And we get a lot of questions of how can we protect ourselves as businesses in contracts if we do have what's lawfully can be recouped if the applicant leaves, because there's some costs you cannot recoup to anything to do with nomination, recruitment, sponsorship. But if you are intending to nominate them for PR sooner than a 482, maybe the businesses might want to turn your mind towards that if they do support the cost upfront. How to protect themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can you actually unpack that one a little bit more, because we get so many questions in that area? Just a simple view, if you're on a 482 and a nomination and a visa, and then how that works changing employment 180 day. Can you maybe break it down to a really simple practical example? Would that be okay?
Yep, sure. I think with the condition 8607, I mean, it's it doesn't give you a lot, but from what the law says is that you can cease work which includes working in another occupation or in any employer not nominated your sponsor for 180 days. So I suppose if a business had a need to move someone in another occupation, they could potentially do that. In the past, they only had limited time and not 180 days. Or if the employees cease work and needed more time to find work with their current sponsor, they could also cease for that period of 180 days. So within that 180 days, that's where they give you the grace period where you can, if you find a new sponsor, you can lodge a new nomination. So that gives more flexibility for a sponsored 482.
Just to further to that, so condition 8607 means that you can only work for the nominating company in the nominated role, and once you've ceased employment, you couldn't actually do any other work until you had a new employer, a new sponsor, and had that nomination transferred. So the department said, well, look, we've got people, and I think part of this is due to processing times, but we've got people who are sitting around in the system who physically can't work, and therefore they're moving into that sort of vulnerable stage where they can't afford to live in Australia, and it's quite difficult. So they said, okay, they're going to give them work rights. So if Yen finished up with me today and then Colin wanted to go work with you tomorrow, that's okay. That is permissible, and that's that's been a huge change in the industry. Yes. And I think that so from an employer's point of view, they could say, okay, we've attracted locally in Australia, and rather than having to wait for our nomination transfer to go through, I can have Yen start tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm finding a lot of people we speak to aren't aware of that, if I'm honest, Jamie and Yen. So that's where we tend to be getting a lot of questions at the moment.
Fantastic. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's 2 points I've got for us here. So 2 learnings, which is great. Sorry, Ian. Did you, oh, sorry, Colin, I was just going to say, can I interrupt you on the visa types? I think you're just going to cover off the 186 and 494, 491.
Yes, so 494 is a provisional permanent visa. So it's not permanent, but it's not temporary either. So it's if you apply, you could get for Medicare depending on what visa you previously held, but similar with the 186. So the 494, it was meant to boost remote activity. So that's what it was intended to do. Whether it did, that's another story. But so the 494 visa has an expanded skill occupation list compared to the 482. So that's why if a business is operating, has an office in the regional area that the sponsored employee will work in, then they could consider the 494 visa.
And the regional area is essentially anything outside of Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. So the rest of Australia, it's
all
take
of
out 3
Australia.
cities. Yeah.
Except Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. All of Perth, all of Tasmania.
It's another great visa that doesn't have all the liabilities that come with the 482, all the sponsorship obligations. I mean, the 494 is a sponsored visa. In a regional area, but I mean, as we said, we're just going to put a few options on the table, and I think for anyone in the audience who's thinking about, okay, well, I have an office in the regional area and I want to move someone there, and if that gives them another sort of, I suppose, a bit of a spark to look at something a bit different, then obviously that's what we're trying to achieve. Sorry,
Yeah, and there are some pros and cons. A lot of pros to the 494, which is that with PR, they do not need you as an employer to sponsor them, so they could nominate themselves with the 191 visa if they meet the criteria, which includes 3 years of living and working in a regional area. So that's quite attractive for both parties. Generally, we find, and the 494 visa does have different skill requirements, so 3 years as opposed to 1 year for the 482, and they will need a skills assessment just to keep in mind as well. So if someone didn't have the qualifications, they may not be able to apply for a 494, but where they are eligible, a 494 is always a tool that we also recommend looking at because of the pathway to PR that is perhaps more attractive.
And also that settlement piece as well, right? Like, so people have to live in the regional area. So I suppose one of the cons for the 491 is that person can move anywhere around regional Australia outside of those 3 major cities. But, the intention is that you're hoping you get the person to come and work for you in the regional area. They settle down, they, maybe have kids there and they buy a house and, all those sort of put those anchors down and then contribute to building those regional centres. So that's really what the purpose or intention of that. And that's why the bar is probably a little bit lower, but the benefit's a lot greater.
Yeah. And so besides the 494, we have the 186, which is the permanent employer nominated visa. So you don't have to be a sponsor, but there needs to be an employer to nominate the candidate. So there's broadly 3 streams, but the labor agreement stream in general is something that's, a bigger, it's a whole treasure chest we can open. But just in terms of the direct entry stream and the TRT stream, TRT is for someone on a 482 essentially, just to make it simple.
That's temporary resident transition for
correct.
Those people who don't use our 3-letter acronyms all the time.
Yeah, TRT, yes, temporary residence transition. So if you have someone on a 482 and they perhaps don't have the qualifications to get a skills assessment, they can transition to the TRT, or maybe they don't want to do a skills assessment. There's various reasons why, and typically, there's more than one answer, whichever is better for both parties, but that's the TRT stream. So the direct entry stream, as the name suggests, directly, you could apply for direct entry stream offshore, but we wouldn't recommend if you need someone that you've never met, and it would typically take very long anyway. So if you were employing a worker offshore, we wouldn't recommend a PR direct entry stream, we could, other visas, but the direct entry stream, they don't have to have worked for you, but they need to have skills assessment in general and 3 years of post-qualification experience. So that would be PR when granted. So they would be permanent residents of Australia when that visa is granted. So those are the 2. And then labor agreement in general, if you have someone who doesn't fit into the migration box, the conversation doesn't always end there because there's always labor agreement streams to explore, potential concessions if you're in a regional area, or if you're not in a regional area, that there are a number of industry labor agreements, and also company-specific labor agreements that that could apply depending on your
the designated area migration agreements as well. So, Colin, you open this treasure chest as to use in with us, and I tell you, there's a lot in there, right? And there's so many different options. It can't, and as I said at the start, it's not really having a 1D approach; it's having a 3D. And how do we look at that and tailor it, to a specific purpose or to specific projects?
Yeah, and look, I'm really conscious that because of the time constraints, we went through all those streams really quickly today. And to be honest, I've unpacked quite a few with Yen over the last few months, and the conversations, even if one can take an hour. So because of that, we will follow up with a bit more detail. But I think with all the, I suppose, the conversation here, one thing I've learned is probably, you need to do your assessment up front, have a proper conversation to figure out which stream is right. But just gives you a broad overview that there are different types of engagements you may not have considered, which maybe you haven't considered up to now and might be a better stream for the workers you need to bring in. Or indeed, if you're a worker, a way you can apply.
And looking at the workforce planning, right? Like saying, okay, how are we going to manage that? Where are we getting the people from? And, it is a whole piece. And I think that getting that sort of core piece right is super important. I see a significant amount of wastage where people will just, go for what they think is the right option, and they'll be paying the premium product and they'll be spending a lot of money on it. And I think that there are different ways to manage programs.
Yeah. And maybe look, I'm conscious of the time, so we might, if people have questions in the chat, maybe start putting them in now, and we'll start maybe addressing them in a moment. Maybe just taking a step back to a CXC, can you explain what type of an agreement that a company like CXC has as a labour hire company, and what the advantages of that type of an agreement might be if you're an employer, and why companies might use services like CXC?
Yen, do you want to have a stab at it, or you want me to go?
So what Colin is talking about is the on-hire labor agreement, which is a type of industry labor agreement. So if you're under SB, so if your company was a sponsor, you cannot on-hire someone because you can only, employ them, and they can work for your entity or associated entities. So, but with the on-hire labor agreement, the company like CXC can then place contractors and on hire them on that basis. So I suppose there's that to consider, where you can have the you don't have to have the obligation as a sponsor, I suppose, although there are other obligations you may have to meet. But a company like CXC with the on hire labor agreement will have the main obligations. But yeah, there's a couple of things to note, which we generally go through, such as salary requirements, 20% above the CSIT, whatever the CSIT is, which is currently 76.5.5, and all the occupations on the 482 list.
So I think that further to that, it's just really the flexibility, right, that can offer. And I think there's this massive misconception out there that once a person is tied into being a party to or under a on hire labour agreement, that they can't have a pathway to permanent residency. Now that is incorrect, and as we've just spoken about, there is a number of visa options available. So I suppose from a candidate point of view, to be able to go and have that freedom and flexibility, that's obviously, they can work on projects that sort of suit them. But from an employer point of view, or from a company point of view, you might say, okay, well, we need to get a contingent workforce for this particular project or for this particular period. We're going to make sure that we can understand exactly, we could sort of outsource all of that, and CXC can obviously pick that up, and through their on hire labour agreement, then they're still operating legally. I think the level of obligations are transferred across to CXC as opposed to the employer. So there is a lot of benefits. But as I said, I think that the big misconception in my mind is that people say, oh well, once they go through that, I don't have a pathway to permanent residency, where you can actually run a couple of applications in parallel, so people can come across and still go through the permanent residency process, but in the meanwhile still be working through CXC and then through that on hire labour agreement situation.
Right. And I've just seen, I think we've got a few questions in the chat. Oh, I thought I saw a different one, but it seems to have gone. So yeah, I've got one question here. My employer are looking to sponsor me on the 482. I'm 5 months into my second year on the 417 from the UK. Is it best to be sponsored on the 482 for 1 or 2 years, or is the 186 an option?
Look, I'll jump in there. I think that at the end of the day, if they've been with the one employer for a period of time, my advice for the employer would be, look, don't worry so much about the 482. If you know the individual, you know they're doing well, and they do have the qualifications and experience to get sponsored on a permanent residency on a 186 straight away, then I would suggest that's a good option for an employer. Obviously, for an employee, it's a great option because they know they're getting that guarantee of permanent residency. I think having that processing time at the moment, probably, as we said, up to 18 months for permanent residency, it probably makes a bit more sense to have a look at that point of view. But I think it's definitely worth a conversation. If I was an employer, I'd be looking at, are you meeting your KPIs? How's your contribution to the business? Do I see the long-term benefit in you? Because, it is a big investment on both sides. And I think, and as I said at the start, Colin, when you asked me what I think has changed, I think that when the price changed for it, it does get a little bit more serious and real. So, but I would definitely have the conversation, make sure that you've got the skills and experience and the qualifications to be able to go through that direct entry program.
Right. I think that's the
other question you were referring to, I did read it. It was saying about what happens past the 180 days. And if the people are just doing casual jobs, but they don't actually have a sponsor, how is that monitored? Right. So it's how does immigration find out? Ian, do you want to jump in on that side?
I mean, so from an employer perspective, they have the obligation to notify in 28 days. So, but ABF monitoring unit would be aware of cessation, and they will reach out to the applicants at sooner or later with procedural fairness letter. If you're still unsure and you haven't left, you haven't found a sponsor to lodge in 180 days, so it may not be on the 180-day job quote, but at some point, the department would and so they have guidance to lodge this as soon as possible. So if you have found someone and you can't lodge the visa, the department has said that even if it's past 180 days, there are leeways where if you have found someone but you can't, you could still submit it if a nomination transfer. Yeah,
but also the other thing is that pretty much will get you on the way out as well. I think that if people are gone for extended periods of time, past that 180 days, despite the fact even if your 482 hadn't actually been cancelled, and what we've found is that going in and having a cessation event, so saying, Colin, okay, you've finished work, you'll never finish work with CXC, by the way, but if you ever did and you're on a visa, then what we do is we would notify the department, but then the department is often pretty slow at cancelling your visa, but on saying that they still have your last day or your last recorded day. One thing that we find that a lot of, a number of employers try to do, their employees a favour and try not to have that reporting period. But I always say no good deed goes unpunished. Report the exact leave the day that they've ceased. And then because if you get caught out that you're not meeting your sponsor obligation by notifying correctly, then you can lose your whole sponsorship facility. So there's no point trying to be nice. I mean, it's good to be sympathetic to people and trying to help them. But given now they have 6 months and prior to that, there was 90 days. And I sort of feel like it was 60 days many, many years ago that you had to find a job or leave the country. So, the level of anxiety wouldn't be as high with 6 months to go as it would be, and having this flexibility to go and work while you're looking for a job will actually change things. So yeah, but as I said, I think that even if your visa is not expiring and you're exiting the country, department could actually, or Home Affairs could actually speak to you, or Australian Border Force could speak to you at the gate and say, hey, we know you've been not working for the last 9 months, or you were ceased 180 days, and then that could lead to potential issues, potential periods of exclusion of coming back to Australia. So there is consequences. That's the bit of the sting in the tail.
Right. Stuart, I don't see any more questions in the chat.
You got any more questions?
I'll ask a question if there's not, and I'm conscious of the time coming to an end soon. But maybe from a macro sense, if you could give a bit of advice for employers out there looking at these options, what might it be, Jamie? 25 years, what is it, 26 years in the business?
25, yeah, exactly. 25 in a couple of months. Look, my thing is, always like I think when you're doing your workforce, your project planning or your workforce planning, I think having a look at what I would say, having overseas recruitment in your HR toolkit or your recruitment toolkit is vital. I think you're shutting, Australia, we've got Australia occupies 5% of the landmass of the whole planet, but we've got 1/3 of 1% of the global population. So I think you can't discount bringing a great person across. But on saying that, I don't think that you use that as a band-aid to fill in skills gaps just from overseas people. It has to be a very fine balance. So I'm being sympathetic towards your local Australian citizens and permanent residents. Obviously, it's cheaper going through the locals, and everyone would prefer that. But I think just being understanding to, like we said before, if you bring someone in on 1 year work experience who's being paid the same as someone on 5 years work experience, you don't want to tip the apple cart. So I think that engaging a professional, obviously preferably us, when you are looking at workforce planning, and then just saying, okay, what destination countries can we look for, and how do we come up with great strategies that will utilize a number of the visa subclasses. And one of my favorite things to say is when you come to us, also when you go to most providers, you'll say, I need to do a 482, and they'll do the 482, but most of them operate like a mechanic. You turn up to a mechanic, say, can you fix my car? And they go, yeah, I've got a hammer and a screwdriver. And what we say is, hang on, I've got 100 different tools in my toolkit. So how can we work better with you to get more bang for your buck, to get more longevity, and really focus on an attraction and retention piece? Because as I said earlier, it's a big investment. Costs are always a thing on everyone's mind. And so how do we maximize that? So I think just having that planning stage and not just doing, fire aim sort of mentality. Because I think that's the other problem is if there's not fantastic planning at the start, people do panic, and when they panic, they just throw money at the problem, and I think that ends up costing projects and costing companies.
Yeah, and you spoke to me lunch. What I found interesting about the Netherlands and the spike you're seeing there, and being a bit more strategic about getting talent. Maybe you could share that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did is we had one of our construction clients, and they were looking like everyone else does in the UK and Ireland, and also the Middle East, or particularly around Dubai. And so what you find is when everybody's sort of fishing in the same spot, you get a very sophisticated candidate, and the candidate says, okay, I want direct to permanent residency, I want my chattels paid for, I want return airfares, I want, right? And so I've heard of crazy money being thrown at people, at hires, you've got to bring my dog, and, it's just insane. Like, and not saying you can't be sympathetic on that for a relocation package, but we did we analysed some data post-COVID, after the bounce back. And what we noticed is there was actually a cohort of people, a growing cohort of people that were coming from the Netherlands who are civil engineers. And so we sort of said to our client, well, look, I'd start to advertise in the Netherlands, because now there's more people going. They go, hey, I know Torben, he went to Australia and it's turned out really well for him. There's more of that familiarity, but there's not that level of sophistication, or they're not asking as much. So the cost per acquisition for a person isn't as high. Also, there's working holiday maker visas that can be utilised. So I think just being a little bit, think outside the square on those types of things, I think are really important. And from my point of view, it's super interesting. Where are the trends of people moving from? What are the geopolitical levers or influences that are pushing that? And how can we maximize on that movement of people?
Great. I see we got another question in the chat. Given the nature of training visas, is it advisable to lodge a PR, direct entry, if an employee has positive skills assessment when they are nearing the end of their time on the 407?
Okay, I was going to say, the lawyer answer is it depends, but it really does. I think in general, what we do is we do get this question, and we will look at what was submitted in your training visa first and foremost, because it depends on what level of skills and what the training plan was, and how we can show that you were performing the skills if you are planning to rely on the time you gained while on your 407. Because as I mentioned, with the 186 direct entry, you need to show 3 years at skill level. So it's up for interpretation whether the work you did on the training visa was at skill level. And it's great for a reason, and it's good because it gives us room to put forth the submission on your behalf. So it's possible. And But it's always an uncharted, it's if there's something, I guess uncharted territory where it has gone well for some people and of course not, because it does truly depend on your,
Yeah, exactly. And one of the requirements for the training visa was the people should have 1 year experience in the last 2 years. So therefore, they're traditionally been a sort of lower skilled person. So my thinking is that if they were onshore, they probably soaked up that training visa processing period that could be added to the experience. And would they get to, if they had a 2-year training visa, then they'd probably be at that 3-year requirement. But to Yen's point, we'd have to look at the skills. So depending on the occupation, it is possible. Can you take this as gospel and advice? No. So, I think really consulting with Yen on that and getting a proper assessment. But I like it because it means you're cutting out that 482 pathway. You're saving money on it and you're saving time, and it sort of moves straight into permanent residency. And it's good for employers and employees.
Great. Look, I'm conscious we're kind of at the end of the time here, and I don't see any other questions on the chat. So maybe I'd just like to thank Jamie and Yen. That was an excellent walkthrough of both the strategic and practical sides of visa compliance and workforce planning. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And if you'd like to hear more about CXC or Absolute Immigration, please reach out. And as I mentioned afterwards, we'll make an ebook with some of the main areas discussed today, and we'll share some of the clips, etc., on social media.
Perfect.
Well,
thanks
thank
for having us, Callum. It's great. Thanks, Yen.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks,
Yen.
Colin.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Thank
Bye.
you.